Police officers of Reddit who have arrested other police officers. What's the story? This was during my time as a United States Marine Corps MP. I never arrested another police officer during my other gigs. I got a phone call from the guy's wife saying he was drunk and refusing to leave the house. Knocked on the front door, but found him crying on the porch about his wife leaving him because she wasn't happy anymore. She walked by the porch and motioned for me to come inside through the glass door. She proceeded to show me the red marks on her throat, the hole in the door that he punched through beside her head, and some other evidence that doesn't need to be disclosed. After asking him to come inside and get dressed, he refused to leave with me. I wasn't going to handcuff him in front of his kid, but he decided to take that moment to run from me. He was faster and got away for about 5 minutes before I found him walking through a playground a couple of buildings over. Caught up to him. He punched me but was taken into custody after a slight use of force. On the way to the station, he tried to kick out a window in my cruiser and told me I was ruining his life. He ended up getting charged with about 7 different charges and was kicked out of the Marines. On his way out, he lied to NCIS and got an investigation opened on me for assault. The investigation was completed thoroughly, and all charges against me were marked as unsubstantiated. But the charges still showed up after I got out and went through a background check for my security clearance. 10 out of 10 would do again. My slight inconvenience was totally worth it for him to go down for domestic assault charges.
I actually have had to arrest 3 separate members of the justice system this year. First, a practicing lawyer and former judge who had been utilizing his position to coerce acts from defendants. He utilized this leverage even after he wasn't a judge anymore. Investigation by DCI revealed he had about a dozen victims, so a warrant for his arrest was made, which I executed. Arresting a guy you used to put defendants in front of is a very odd feeling. He weaseled out of prison time and got it all suspended and put on a direct supervision probation program. Absolute horse crap. I've seen guys do way less and get way more time, but it's not really a secret that money has a habit of tipping the scales of justice. Next was a prison guard who strangled his girlfriend and then stalked her relentlessly. I actually arrested him twice because after he posted bail on the first one, he was spotted lurking outside her home only 45 minutes after being released. He's currently in on felony assault, strangulation of a household member, and felony violation of a protection order. He's still in my jail awaiting trial with a bail that has been substantially increased. I'm anticipating prison time for him, but only time will tell. Third was a city police officer. I'm a county deputy sheriff. We received a call from a 6-year-old that his dad was in the garage doing drugs and wouldn't come out. Showed up to find 4 very young kids running around unsupervised. It was a city police officer smoking ice that he had confiscated during a traffic stop, and he didn't report it or turn it into evidence. DCI took the case from us due to the potential conflict of interest and have placed him in another county's jail. I haven't heard any more about it. Hope he does time too. What kind of jerk leaves his little kids totally alone and unsupervised while they smoke hard drugs, especially when said person is a freaking cop? Unforgivable in my opinion. But yeah, 2020 has been a very strange year for me.
Not me, but my dad, who was a cop. He was still working as a full-time cop before switching full-time to firefighting. During a traffic stop around 11 p.m. back in the mid-80s, he stopped a nicer car speeding well over the limit. Before he's out of his cruiser, the driver has what looks like a badge hanging out of the window. My dad walks up, does the usual song and dance, and the driver said, "You obviously can't freaking see who I am." My dad says, yes sir, I do, and right now I'm conducting a traffic stop. Turns out the driver was a lieutenant colonel in the Ohio State Highway Patrol, which is pretty high up in their rank structure. My dad again asks him for license and insurance, and the guy goes off threatening to call Dick Celeste, who was the governor at the time, and threatening his job, saying he was just trying to get back to Columbus after an engagement and so on. Eventually, he calls for backup and has another officer there to witness what was going on. Eventually, my dad writes him a ticket, and while still screaming, Mr. Pulling Rank drives away. The next shift, my dad gets called in by his assistant chief and is asked about the stop. Apparently, the colonel of OSP was calling him about it. In the end, they had to bring in the other officer to write a statement of what went on, and nothing came of it except the ticket wasn't contested and paid. A probationary officer goes on a blind double date with his roommate. They had been at the racetrack drinking, so they take the train to downtown. Everyone is pretty drunk, him in particular. Maybe to entertain or show off for his date, he's acting goofy. As everyone is getting off the train, he sees some guy bent over tying his shoes. The rocket scientist decides to leapfrog over the guy. Only neither of them has much balance. The probationary cop basically jumps over Slash on the guy and drives his face straight into the pavement because he's too drunk and the guy wasn't expecting it. Everyone jumps up, and he starts trying to defuse the situation he just caused. Turns out the guy is a 17-year-old kid heading down to spend the weekend with his grandparents who now has 2 broken teeth and a broken nose. The drunk cop starts saying stuff like, "It's okay. It'll be fine. I'm a cop. It's all good." When he realizes the crowd isn't going to let him walk away, he bails on foot and tries to run off. A few guys chase him down and grab him. Cops get called and detain him. I was the on-call detective who was called out at 10:30 to handle the case. He refused to answer any questions and was booked in for felony battery based on the extent of injuries and age of the victim. He never made it off probation and resigned.
Ex-sheriff's deputy here. One night on shift, I had the great misfortune to overhear on the radio that a small local chief of police, the whole department was only 3 people, was not answering a radio call. So my shift partner goes out to the call they were trying to get him to go to, and I make my way to try to locate this chief of police. On my way to the police station, thinking maybe he's just asleep on the couch, I see a squad car pulled off onto the side of the road with lights going. In that moment, my heart sank. My first thought was, oh no, this dude just lost his life in a traffic stop. As I'm walking up to the car in a hurry, I notice he's slumped over. I reached into the open driver's window and grabbed his shoulder to try to put my fingers against his neck to feel if he has a pulse, just generally checking if he's still alive. As I'm doing this, I notice a distinct and strong odor of alcohol as the chief of police wakes up, looks at me, puts the car in drive, and pulls away. About that time, another deputy pulls up behind my car, and I pull out my radio to report that the chief is driving off. The other deputy, forgetting that we all use a shared frequency, then comes over the radio saying, "Hey, he should be easy to follow. His lights are on." Well, the lights go off fast. Fast forward to several hours later, command staff is out at the police department seizing the weapons and evidence that's stored within it. This chief of police shows up with the mayor of the small town and submits himself to a breathalyzer. He barely passes. Fun fact, district attorneys do not like prosecuting chiefs of police, especially when politics are starting to get involved. Unrelated to that, I was let go about 2 weeks later for calling a suspect a jerk. Unprofessional conduct, apparently. Former police officer and correctional officer here. I never actually arrested a fellow cop myself. However, my field training officer was arrested and fired from my former PD twice for drunk and disorderly before I worked there. He got his job back twice through union arbitration and, to his credit, gave up drinking. When I was working at the jail, we had a cop who was put in a protective custody self-harm watch after being arrested for stalking a woman he met on a call. He got obsessed with her and kept bothering her after the fact, and after she reported him, he made threats against her. A fellow CO at my jail was arrested for producing and distributing inappropriate content, and he got girls as young as 9 to send him photos, which he distributed on the dark web. He's doing 25 years in prison minimum. He won't be eligible for parole for another 15 or so. We had 7 officers at the jail beat a disabled inmate and then lie about it on their reports. The shift commander then tried to erase the video. All were fired and arrested, but later were acquitted of all charges. Sad thing was, they were all guilty as hell.
Saw a true crime video where this police officer ended his ex-wife's life because she was trying to divorce him and she had a really nice life insurance policy. He was struggling hard with bills. Apparently, the crime split the whole police department up. People who thought he was guilty versus the people who couldn't believe it and thought he wasn't. In the end, he was caught because he was the only one who had keys to the car she drove. And the police found a paper with calculations on it which detailed how much he would have left over after the life insurance money paid off his debt in his house. He was also involved with a coworker. To add context on why the department was split, the side that was on his side were co-workers for years. They simply couldn't believe that someone they had worked alongside with could do that. He had a good reputation at work, but at home, he was different. The evidence I mentioned was pretty much the last missing factor because the cops had a very hard time building a case. He covered his tracks really well and made sure he had a strong alibi. He honestly would have gotten away with it. In the beginning, he was helpful and gave as many statements as the cops needed, but the more evidence the cops were picking up, the more he started resisting, and he wasn't compliant anymore. He was actually very abusive towards her, but she was the main breadwinner of the house. She got tired of it and was trying to move on and settle the divorce as calmly and nicely as possible, but he wasn't complying. It got to the point where he would break in the house whenever he wanted. Plus, he would leave her recorded messages on the home phone. Since she was a nurse, she recorded all calls because sometimes her patients would call her and ask questions or whatever. But when the cops searched her place, they thought it was very weird how those tapes from his calls were missing. After all, he had a key. Plus, the incident was done in her work parking lot. His alibi was strong but seemed very plotted. On top of that, they got confirmation he rented a van, the same looking van that was seen during the incident. The police couldn't trace the license plate because they were going off the cameras from the car dealership across the street. It was too far to get a clear reading on it. He had a very good reputation at work. He just had a lot of circumstantial evidence against him. I'm an actual cop, so I'll give an answer. I've arrested 12 cops for DUI, 2 of which included charges of possessing weapons while intoxicated. I've arrested 1 cop for writing a check on a closed account and another for violating a protection order during a very ugly divorce. I have assisted the feds on a couple of tax-related arrests. I've also arrested a total of 3 cops for dereliction of duty, one of those cops being one who didn't arrest or conduct a DUI investigation after a crash involving another cop. All those cases proceeded in a similar fashion as other people with similar backgrounds and criminal records would have with similar offenses. The slap on the wrist is actually really common and the norm with first-time offenders. Also, the things I found cops arrested for are generally the same things other middle-class blue-collar workers get in trouble for. Issues with substance abuse, particularly alcohol, and financial problems. My career is perfectly fine. I faced absolutely no negative repercussions from any of my peers. I'd say if you work for a large enough agency, you've probably arrested or written a ticket to a cop.